Hello everyone, and a very warm welcome to this ICAS webinar, The Future of ICAS's Code of Ethics. This webinar will cover the following topics: ICAS's Code of Ethics revised, effective from the 1st of January, organisational culture, and ethical leadership. For those who don't know me, my name is Bill MacLeod. I'm a chartered accountant and I'm a member of the ICAS Ethics Board and have the pleasure of being your host today. For today's discussion, I'm delighted that I'm joined by James Barber, Chartered Accountant, Director of Policy Leadership at ICAS, and Jim Law, who's a Director at Dodds & Law Research Associates. Before we begin, just a few housekeeping matters to remind you of. You can submit questions at any time through the Q&A facility, which can be accessed at the top of your screen. It should be just next to the chat button, you might be more familiar with. Questions can be submitted anonymously. We'll be saving all your questions until towards the end of the webinar for a live Q&A. Please also join the conversation today through the chat box accessed at the top of your screen. This allows you to comment or discuss with fellow attendees on matters covered by this webinar. We are, of course, recording this webinar and will make it available for on-demand viewing afterwards in case you want to refer back to it or share it with others. We will look forward to receiving your questions throughout the course of the webinar, and of course, we will try and get to those as many as possible. I'm also aiming to finish by 12 o'clock because I know everyone will have busy diaries and will want to be done by then. So first of all, I'd actually just like to introduce our panelists and ask them to provide a little bit more information about their current roles. So Jim, please.
Okay, thank you very much, Bill. I'm Jim Law. I'm an independent researcher and a fellow of the Market Research Society. I've worked for a large range of public and private sector organisations over the last 30 years, and I've been conducting research on behalf of ICAS for the last 5 years or so.
Okay, thanks, Jim. Now over to you, James.
Hello, everyone. I'm James Barber. I'm the Director of Policy Leadership at ICAS. I oversee a lot of the policy work within ICAS, and that includes in the area of ethics. And I'm a former technical advisor to a former board member of the International Ethics Standards Board for Accountants. Thank you.
Good. Thank you. I'm now going to hand over to James, who will take us through the main changes to the revised ICAS Code of Ethics that will take effect from 1st of January 2025. This actually supersedes the current version of the code, which took effect in 2022. James will also discuss the power of one literature on organisational culture. So over to you, James.
Thanks so much, Bill. I'm taking you through the revisions to the ICAS Code of Ethics, which takes effect from 1 January 25. This code is substantively based on the Code of Ethics issued by the International Ethics Standards Board for Accountants, and we do add some specific ICAS, generally UK-related material, just to ensure that the code is as rigorous as possible. And just to remind you that in the UK, many elements of the International Independence Standards from the ISBA Code do not apply, as the FRC ethical standard applies to both audit and public interest assurance engagements. So that's really part 4A of our ICAS code. It's really the FRC ethical standard which has applicability. Now, looking at the changes to the ICAS code, the key areas are in the following areas: technology-related changes, and that includes to the application material supporting the confidentiality fundamental principle, in the area of complexity, which is a new addition to the code, and the threats from and using outputs of technology. There are also changes to the definition of a public interest entity, but again, this is covered by the FRC ethical standard. And as you may be aware, the government is currently considering that definition as part of the proposed draft audit and corporate governance reform bill. So more to come in that next year. In terms of the technology-related changes, you'll be glad to hear they are principles-based. They apply to all technologies to try to cover the ever-evolving landscape of technology transformation. In recent years, we've seen Gen AI really take primary focus in the business and indeed wider society. But of course, we've got things coming down the track, such as quantum. So we have to ensure that it's a principles-based approach to try and cover all the different potential possibilities and advancements of technology. And the revisions provide guidance relevant to elements of the fundamental principles that are important for the digital age, and of course enhance the code's robustness in guiding the mindset and behaviour of professional accountants. They do, of course, also enhance the international independence standards in various areas, but as I've said, it's the ethical standard issued by the Financial Reporting Council, which has applicability in the UK. But firstly, a reminder from the extant 2022 version of the ICAS Code of Ethics. And this is the principle of objectivity, which is to exercise professional or business judgment without being compromised by bias, conflict of interest, or undue influence of or undue reliance on individuals, organisations, technology, or other factors. And I just want to focus there on technology because this is absolutely crucial with AI. This is not new, but it's really to highlight that this inclusion is really important, because one of the biggest dangers with using AI is, of course, bias, in terms of bias in the data that may be used, and then potentially bias interpreting the output. So the focus there on technology really is important. Now, when we look at the new revisions, these affect all parts of the code, and as you can see there, they cover a wide range of sections right across the code itself. And we'll come to some of these in more detail in just a second. Firstly, professional competence. So the knowledge and skills necessary for a professional activity vary depending on the nature of the activity being undertaken, and that was drafted to try and build in a technology angle. So it really will depend on the particular assignment that someone is doing and the extent to which they are making use of technology, whatever that technology may be. This part of the code also highlights the importance of soft skills, and these are becoming ever more important for professional accountants, and we definitely need that human factor given the advancements in technology. So it talks there about interpersonal communication and organizational skills, which facilitate the professional accountant's interaction with entities and individuals with whom the accountant interacts. Moving on to confidentiality, we now actually have a definition of confidential information that's contained in the glossary. And this is any information, data, or other material in whatever form or medium, including written, electronic, visual, or oral, that is not publicly available. And in addition, the paragraph 114.1A1 highlights that maintaining the confidentiality of information acquired in the course of professional and business relationships involves the full business cycle. So it's really from the collection right through to its lawful destruction. And that really has to be borne in mind if you're handling data which is confidential. Now, in terms of the disclosure of confidential information, there are exceptions to this prohibition. The substance is not new, but it is reworded with some additional new content. So paragraphs and the requirements 114.1 to 114.2 describe the prohibition on disclosure of confidential information. And this is followed by the additional paragraph 114.3, which states the limited situations where a professional accountant may disclose or use confidential information. So as an exception, a professional accountant may disclose or use confidential information where there is a legal or professional duty or right to do so, where this is authorised by the client or any person with the authority to permit disclosure or use of the confidential information, and this is not prohibited by law or regulation. Now, this is not a change in substance, but it is, the wording has been refined just in case this does appear differently. There's no change in substance, but just as a reminder. Now, given where we're going with large amounts of data and the use of AI, it was felt there was a need to add more on technology, specifically in relation to technology. So the application material is included at 114.3A3 to provide examples of circumstances where a professional accountant might seek authorization to use or disclose confidential information. So for certain matters, this authorization could be of a general nature, for example, as found in some contracts signed between firms and their clients that permits the use of confidential information acquired in the course of a professional activity for the purposes of the firm's internal training or other quality enhancement initiatives. Now, it's important, this reference to internal training in this paragraph is intended to encompass the training of both internal AI systems and staff in either a firm or an employing organisation. In more specific circumstances where a PA seeks authorization to use or disclose confidential information, the revisions set out what a professional accountant might communicate when seeking the authorization, preferably in writing, and also specify that such authorization should be sought from the individual or entity that provided the confidential information in the first place. Now, this is just the specific provision. I'm not going to say any more on this, but when you're looking back at the slides, it's just there for ease of use. Also, I should highlight the paragraph R114.2. A professional accountant shall not use or disclose information in respect of which the duty of confidentiality applies, notwithstanding that that information has become publicly available, whether properly or improperly. So that covers situations where it's in fact leaked to the media. It should still be treated as confidential by the professional accountant. Moving on to complexity. Given the pace of change and technological advancement, it was felt there was a need to put something into the code in relation to complexity. It's not just to cover complexity, it covers complexity in a wider sense, but really the focus was primarily at technology to begin with. So the revisions have been made to the conceptual framework at paragraphs 120.5A6 to 120.5A8 to recognise that professional judgment exercised by professional accountants might need to take into account the complexity of the circumstances that they face. Now, although complex circumstances have always existed and are not a new phenomenon specific to technology, rapid digitalisation has increased the interconnectedness of social, economic, legal and geopolitical systems and is a complex circumstance that PAs are now facing. In this regard, the guidance included should not be restricted to technology-specific complex circumstances. Now, one of the main reasons for introducing this is when artificial intelligence gets to the stage that's learning it by itself, because it then becomes a very complex process, and the only way to really deal with this is to manage the complexity. Now, the code then highlights that the managing complexity involves making the firm or employing organisation and, if appropriate, relevant stakeholders aware of the inherent uncertainties or difficulties arising from the facts and circumstances, being alert to any developments or changes in the facts and circumstances and assessing whether they might impact any judgments the accountant has made. And it might also include other matters, including analysing, investigating as relevant any uncertain elements, the variables and assumptions and how they are connected or interdependent, using technology to analyse relevant data to inform the professional accountant's judgment, and consulting with others, including experts, to ensure appropriate challenge and additional input as part of the evaluation process. Now, that last one there might be particularly important for professional accountants if you are using such AI tools. There will be a need to consult with others, including experts, to ensure that there is appropriate challenge and additional input as necessary. There is also a slight amendment in terms of organisational culture. So we have now included an additional part to 120.13A3, and this is to ensure that professional accountants exhibit ethical behaviour in dealings with individuals with whom and entities with which they, the firm or the employing organisation, has a professional or business relationship. To a certain extent, this mirrors the old courtesy concept, which is still included in our code, but actually is not in the international code. So just to highlight then, again, more focus here on organisational culture, which is becoming ever more important in this code of ethics. Now, moving on specifically to identifying threats relating to the use of technology, paragraphs 200.6A2 for professional accountants in business and 300.6A2 for professional accountants in practice. Very similar, they highlight facts and circumstances relating to the use of technology that might create threats for a professional accountant when undertaking a professional activity. These include the self-interest threat that a professional accountant might not have sufficient information and expertise or access to an expert with sufficient understanding to use and explain the technology and its appropriateness for the purpose intended. And a self-review threat is created where the technology was designed or developed using the knowledge, expertise or judgment of the accountant or employing organisation or firm. And 200.6A2, so the following are examples, provides examples of facts and circumstances relating to the use of technology that might create threats for a professional accountant when undertaking a professional activity. In terms of self-interest threats, the data available might not be sufficient for the effective use of the technology. The technology might not be appropriate for the purpose for which it is to be used. The accountant might not have sufficient information and expertise or access to an expert with sufficient understanding to use and explain the technology and its appropriateness for the purpose intended. And there's also self-review threats. The technology was designed or developed using the knowledge, expertise, or judgment of the accountant or employing organisation. So these self-interest threats and self-review threats really need to be considered anytime you are using technology. You then have to evaluate the technology threat. So the professional accountant's evaluation of the level of a threat associated with the use of technology might also be impacted by the work environment within the employing organisation and its operating environment. For example, the level of corporate oversight and internal controls over the technology, the assessments of the quality and functionality of technology that are undertaken by a third party, and training that is provided regularly to all relevant employees so they obtain and maintain the professional competence to sufficiently understand, use and explain the technology and its appropriateness for the purpose intended. So this is crucial here, evaluating the particular threat, and a lot will depend on the governance within your respective organisations, the controls you have in place, who designed the specific technology. It might be its third-party software. So if we take Excel, for example, I think most people would just rely on that given its track history and that it is designed by a major technology company. That might not be true at some of the more recent products, which are still very much in their infancy, so AI tools. So do be careful and do ensure that you properly evaluate the threat of any technology which you are using. Then coming on to using the output of technology, and additional paragraphs have been added at R220.8 and 220.A1 in section 220, which looks at the preparation and presentation of information for professional accountants in business. And of course, there are corresponding paragraphs in the 300 series for those in practice. When preparing or presenting information, a professional accountant who intends to use the output of technology, whether internally or externally developed, is required to exercise professional judgment to determine the appropriate steps to take, if any, to guard against matters such as bias or being associated with misleading information. So when a professional accountant in public practice intends to use the output of technology in the course of undertaking a professional activity, the accountant needs to determine whether the use is appropriate for the intended purpose. And on this slide, there's a number of factors listed. I'm just going to give you a few of those. So for example, the nature of the activity to be performed by the technology, the expected use of or extent of reliance on the output of the technology, and whether the PA has the ability or has access to an expert with the ability to understand, use, and explain the technology and its appropriateness for the purpose intended. While ultimately it is the output of the technology that a professional accountant will utilise in the delivery of their professional activity or service, in order to be able to use such output, the whole process of making use of the technology is considered within the application material, as can be seen in the full list of bullets above. So that will include, again, governance, controls, etc. All these factors need to be considered. There's other changes in the code which really won't have that much of an impact. Section 325 focuses on engagement quality reviewer and other appropriate reviewers. Most of this will be audit related in the part 4A of the code. So again, FRC ethical standard applies, but there might be the odd occasion you do need to refer to that. The code now has been conformed to take account of the changes to international standard and quality management, ISQM1, which all those out there doing audits will be well aware of. These are primarily in the areas of the code which are the international independence standard, so again covered by the FRC's ethical standard, and likewise the changes to the provisions on non-audit services. Again, it's the FRC's ethical standard that covers these. Just quickly on the international independence standards, so the ISBA has also incorporated revisions to Part 4A and Part 4B of the code in relation to technology. But as I've mentioned, it's the FRC ethical standard that applies, and they have included some of these changes into the revisions to the revised ethical standard, which takes effect in December. And a detailed explanation as to the interaction between the ICAS Code of Ethics and the FRC's ethical standard is contained at section 400 of the code. With highlighting in section 331, agencies and referrals, we've now removed all references to Ireland in the code. So you'll now not find anything relating to Ireland given changes in the regulatory environment in recent years. Some future changes which are in the pipeline, we have tax planning changes. So at the moment, consideration has been given to how this will impact the professional conduct in relation to taxation, which is under review. The current thinking is we will be able to claim equivalence by making some minor changes to the existing professional conduct in relation to taxation. So we don't anticipate any significant changes there, just some minor changes, and that should then lead us to being able to issue an equivalence statement when we ultimately adopt those tax planning provisions which are contained in the ISBA code. And this December, we expect ISBA to approve its sustainability-related changes to the code, as well as those in terms of the use of experts workstream. And we'll then have to give consideration as to when we'll introduce them into the ICAS Code of Ethics in due course. I am not going to cover the FRC's ethical standard. I have included certain slides here just for those in audit, just to give you a brief summary of the changes, but just to highlight that the revised ethical standard from the FRC does become effective from the 15th of December, and it now has published guidance on the objective, reasonable and informed third-party test as well. So these additional slides are there for those who can look at them after this webinar, just to give you a summary of some of the key changes. Now, organisational culture. We are currently updating our Power of One paper on organisational culture to take account of development since it was first published. And just to remind people that next year will be the 10th anniversary of the Power of One, so we're giving considerations to what else we'll be doing in relation to that as well. A major milestone for ICAS, and it really has been an influential piece of work on the global stage. Now, in terms of our organisational culture paper, there will be no changes of substance, but we really are wanting to update this just for developments that have taken place in the last few years, and to remind people that organisational culture can have a major impact on ethical behaviour, and this indeed has been recognised globally. We'll also be publishing a related paper that has been produced by CPA Canada, to which we provided input, and we'll signpost this from our Power of One paper because it focuses on organisational culture as well. On modern slavery, we recently published an article on ICAS.com, what CEAs need to know. So as highlighted in the Power of One organisational culture and values paper, the right tone at the top of organisations is essential. An organisation's values, ethical principles and code of conduct, including policies and procedures in relation to modern slavery, need to be set and then promoted by the board to influence all in the organisation to adopt and live them. Producing a comprehensive modern slavery statement reflects the actual steps taken by an organisation and incorporates deliverable actions in one such step, but does not mean that an organisation's efforts to eradicate modern slavery and its operations are complete. So it really is a substance here. Organisations really need to take this on board and ensure that they have proper processes, controls in place to allow them to issue that statement with confidence. So while having a comprehensive statement, as I said, is a good place to start, it should reflect genuine activities that are embedded in the company's day-to-day operations, which are aimed at increasing transparency and accountability. Organisations ought to know where the problems could be in relation to modern slavery and have mechanisms in place around what they'll do if an issue is found. If no problems are being reported, then boards need to be curious as to how that can be. There is a need for proactive disclosures from businesses around what they are doing, what they found, and how issues were dealt with. So please remember, if you're finding nothing, do ask the question, is this actually right, and is there more we need to do? So that's me quickly taking you through those areas. I'm now going to hand over to Jim Law, who's going to take us through the recent ICAS survey on ethical leadership.
Thanks very much, James. I'll move on to my summary here of the recent research that we conducted with ICAS members. What I'd like to do is just advise you of the research objectives. The research explores what ethical leadership looks like in an increasingly uncertain world and establishes the perceptions of members on ethical leadership, particularly investigating ethical challenges that they face today, who they view as being ethical leaders and the characteristics of ethical leaders, experience with ethical issues, and how they have or would deal with ethical dilemmas in the future. Just to confirm, this was an online survey which was issued to a sample of over 10,000 ICAS members. The survey was issued in mid-June and closed in early July. 710 individuals participated in the survey, so that's a response rate of 7%, which is slightly higher than the normal response rate, which is somewhere around 3 or 4% in surveys of this nature. You'll see the base numbers in the slide do change because it varies depending on the number of people who answered each specific question. This is a voluntary survey. We can't force people to take part or answer questions, so that does move around a little. The maximum margin of error related to this member survey is plus or minus 3.8%. So again, that should be kept in mind when we're viewing the figures. It's also important to say that strict confidentiality is provided to all the people that took part in the research, and ICAS doesn't have access to the identity of participants. So there should be no positive or negative impact by taking part and sharing the individual views. So, quick look at the executive summary of the project. What we found was that ethical challenges are perceived to be more common nowadays, 42% saying it was more common nowadays, compared with 5% saying it was less common nowadays, and just under half indicating there's no difference nowadays. Most respondents feel well equipped to be able to deal with ethical challenges, and most consider ethical dimensions on their daily work and consider that their organisation values ethical leadership. Ethical leaders are considered to have integrity, consistency, openness, courage, empathy, and are seen to be trustworthy. Ethical organisations are considered to be transparent, accountable, supportive, fair, and have strong ethical policies. Most respondents have provided ethical leadership to their colleagues, 60% provided it to senior colleagues, and 59% to junior colleagues, which generally was well received by their colleagues. AI has increased ethical considerations for almost half, 42% saying that. Interestingly, we find that the line between ethical and unethical behaviour is not always clear for the majority of ICAS members, so 59% saying it wasn't always clear to them. Most, just over half, 57%, consider ICAS to provide strong ethical leadership, but around 1 in 5 thinking that ICAS's leadership could be stronger. Less than half were aware of Power for One, which I think is probably disappointing given that it's been in existence for 10 years. And with it coming up to anniversary, I'm sure that's a challenge for ICAS to consider how to increase and communicate further awareness and understanding of the campaign. It was perceived that ICAS could offer more advice and training on ethical challenges, particularly for individuals. A substantial minority, 41%, have experienced pressure related to ethical issues, and the top perceived ethical challenges are both technical and behavioural and include conflicts of interests, pressure to provide or accept misleading information, accounting practice irregularities, tax practice and HMRC issues, and greenwashing and sustainability issues. Almost all, so 94%, agree with the statement. It is your role as a chartered accountant to call out behaviour that falls below acceptable ethical standards. 90% have experienced an ethical challenge in their career, and the average number of challenges was 4.8. But there will be some overlap in that with fewer instances, as there can be multiple ethical challenges within the one situation. The majority raised concerns, if they had an ethical challenge, raised concerns about the issue internally with their management and or their colleagues. And a minority who chose not to raise the issue had concerns in relation to their job security, their career prospects, or their relationship with colleagues. The majority were satisfied, so those that raised an issue, the majority were satisfied with the outcome in relation to most issues, although there was a minority who were dissatisfied with the outcome. Most, 91%, think that there is an individual that they could approach confidentially if they had an ethical challenge. We find that the majority of organisations are perceived to have an ethical code or policy, and most commonly that's located on an internal website. Most individuals, 71%, would definitely report an ethical challenge internally in their organisation. 1 in 5, 22%, don't think that organisations provide a supportive environment to raise ethical concerns. And most think that there should be greater protection for individuals, and an increase in the culture of openness to provide increased protection for individuals who raise ethical challenges. So, looking at a couple of those issues in slightly more detail. Firstly, in ethical leadership, we asked people that took part in the survey to please write in the names of any individuals you consider to be ethical leaders, and this could be in any walk of life. And also, what do you consider to be the main characteristics of an individual to be seen as an ethical leader? Now, the responses we got from that included an incredibly wide range of issues, from kind of statesmen and world leaders, environmental activists, politicians, and other people from other walks of life. The main characteristics are integrity, willingness to sacrifice, consistent ethical behaviour, openness, courage, trustworthiness, fairness, empathy, and a commitment to fostering an ethical culture. In relation to organisations, we asked them to write down the names of any organisations that you consider to be ethical leaders. And again, that could be from any sector. And we asked them, what do you consider the main characteristics for an organisation to be seen as an ethical leader? ICAS was mentioned significantly more than any other organisation, suggesting a strong belief in ICAS's ethical standards and practices. But again, many other organisations were also mentioned at this point. And ethical leadership in organisations is characterised by integrity, transparency, accountability, strong ethical policies, supportive culture, commitment to core values, openness, and a fair treatment for all. I mentioned in the summary that there is this blurred lines. That we asked, to what extent do you consider the lines between ethical and unethical behaviour to be clear? Only 39% considered it to be always clear, 46% saying clear in some, less clear in others, and 3% saying not clear at all. So there are a total of 59% indicating that they were not clear in all circumstances. The most common perceived ethical challenges, again, I covered this in the summary, but you'll see the variation there. Conflicts of interest comes out really strongly as the top perceived common ethical challenges nowadays, followed by pressure to provide or accept misleading or false information, accounting practice issues, tax practices, HMRC, greenwashing, fraud, theft, bribery, corruption, and so on down the list. I'm not going to read every category and every number out on these. The slides will be available as part of the pack that will be available to everybody after the webinars posted on the ICAS website. Looking at ICAS's role, we asked the question, to what extent do you consider ICAS to be an ethical leader in the accountancy profession? And 57% said that it provides strong ethical leadership, whereas 22%, 1 in 5, said that ICAS provides leadership, but it could be stronger. And a very small number of people, 8%, don't consider that ICAS provide ethical leadership. What should ICAS offer? We asked, which of the following types of ethical support should ICAS offer to members? Advice for individuals experiencing ethical challenges was the top response. 81% think that should be provided, followed by training for individuals on how to deal with ethical challenges. So therefore, this support for individuals came out more strongly than the next two options, which were support, advice, or training for organisations. And you'll see, I've highlighted in red, only 2% think that ICAS should not provide support related to ethical challenges. ICAS principles. When exercising professional judgment, we asked, do you actively consider the principles set out in the ICAS Code of Ethics? We found that 41%, so just under half, say that yes, they always consider the principles. 37% said they sometimes, depending on the circumstances. And around 1 in 10, 12%, indicated that no, they don't actively consider the principles set out in the ICAS Code of Ethics. Well, questions on experience. Have you experienced any of the following in relation to ethical issues? Pressure from clients to act unethically. 17% said yes. Pressure from colleagues in your organisation to act unethical. 21%. And pressure from the management of your organisation to act unethically and not raise ethical concerns. 23%. 59% say that they had not experienced any pressure, so therefore we know there's an overlap in those first three categories. So 41% have experienced some kind of pressure. And younger members, we found when we looked at the segments in it, younger members are more likely to have experienced pressure. What challenges have you experienced? Which of the following have you experienced? And again, this falls in line very much so with the perceptions that exist. So we've got conflicts of interest, workplace and employee issues, pressure to provide or accept misleading or false information, accounting practice issues, then followed by bullying, fraud, theft, employee expenses, audit issues coming through as challenges that have been experienced. This is quite a long list of issues, so therefore it falls onto 2 slides. We see reducing numbers down here, but I've again highlighted in red here that only 10% have not experienced any ethical challenges, so therefore 90% have experienced an ethical challenge. In the last 12 months, we've picked out the most common. So again, this follows a pattern you'll see in the previous slides, conflict of interest coming up tops. Then we've got workplace, workforce and employee issues coming next, much more clearly further ahead of the other issues that have been experienced in the last 12 months. But nonetheless, a number of very concerning issues, I think, that are being raised as ethical challenges in the last 12 months. Perceptions of the future, we asked about ethical policies in organisations. Does your organisation have an ethical policy? 79% said yes, but 13% said no. So there's still over 10% of organisations of which members work in who do not have an ethical policy or an ethical statement. Future intentions, if you are faced with an ethical challenge tomorrow that you consider needed reporting, would you raise it internally in your organisation, which is the first set of the darker bars? Would you raise it with your client, which is the middle bars in each category, or would you raise it externally, which is the far right bar in each of the 3 sequences? And what we see is that internally, 71% would definitely report it internally, but less so in the other categories. And then we move into probably report it, then externally creeps up to 37% would probably report it externally. I should highlight, though, in the far right set of bars that 41% of the people would say they don't have a client, it's not applicable to them. Again, that'd be people who are working in industry rather than working in practice. Support for raising concerns in general terms. Do you think that organisations provide a supportive environment where people are encouraged to raise ethical concerns? Well, the majority, 61%, say yes, they do. But I think probably concerningly, 1 in 5, 20% said no, that they don't think that organisations provide a supportive environment. We then asked those 20%, those people, which of the following applies to why there is inadequate support for those who raise ethical concerns. And we see that overwhelmingly the strongest response was that organisations seek to avoid potential reputational damage. It may show the management a poor light, whistleblowers are not valued, and those who raise ethical concerns internally are not valued. And lastly, it may impact on profitability coming through as an issue also. Support. What more could be done to provide increased protection for individuals who choose to raise ethical concerns? There should be work to increase the culture of openness. That's a view of 73% of members. And there should be greater protection of confidentiality for individuals, who 69% thought that was an issue. And again, I highlighted the red there, that only 6% think that increased protection is not required. So overwhelming majority believe that increased protection is required. That concludes my summary. I'd like to hand back to my colleagues now, and I'll be available in the question and answer session should any have any questions specifically to the research.
Good. Thanks very much, Jim, and thanks, James, for that's a really interesting presentations. And probably no surprise that technology featured quite strongly in some of the updates that James was talking us through. And probably reflecting on Jim's presentation there, I think the trends are probably consistent with my experience in terms of I've certainly encountered probably more ethical challenges, and in terms of the maybe it says something about me or whatever, but the categories of where people encounter ethical challenges, I was going through that list, Jim, and I think you'd actually tick most of them over quite a long career where I've had challenges like that. So I certainly recognise what you're talking about. Now, before we move on to any Q&A that comes in, it'd be really helpful if you could leave us a rating for today's webinar. There's going to be a poll appearing on your screens now or in the chat box at the top of the screen. We really appreciate your feedback, so please take a few moments to respond. It is as simple as 1 to 5 stars, so I'll pause for a few seconds, but hopefully it won't take too long for anyone to complete that, and then we can move on. So hopefully you have a chance to complete that feedback, because it is really helpful. And just try and think, we're going to try to move on to questions and answers I've submitted. I can encourage you just to type in, if you go into the Q&A box, you can actually ask some questions in there. But I have a couple of starters for 10 that I thought I might actually pick up on. And maybe just start off with yourself, James. And you talked quite a lot about there's a lot of the real theme of technology coming through in your update on the Code of Ethics. I just wondered, does that encompass everything that we're seeing in generative AI? Because that's actually a very current sort of topic that's coming through as well. So just wondering if you can maybe pick up, and do you think the code's going to have to be updated again to reflect what's happening with generative AI?
A very pertinent question, Bill. And when these provisions were designed and ISBA approved these a couple of years ago, they tried to be as forward-thinking as possible. And so at this moment in time, I haven't seen anything that would say that what has been included is not fit for purpose. But I think I couldn't just sit here today and say that they will stand the test of time, given the pace of technological development and the significant increase in use in AI products, in particular Gen AI at this moment, but who knows what it will be in a few months' time. I also referred to quantum computing in my
Hello, James, I've lost you, or is it me that, can you? Hello, James, no sound.
Sorry,
James, I lost you. You're back. Okay, on you go.
Okay, so I was just saying there that there's all these too. And so I think at some stage there will be a need for further revisions to the code. But I think in the interim, what we might have to do, both at an ICAS level and at the International Ethics Standards Board for accountants level, is consider the need for guidance and potentially case studies. There's already some case studies on the ISBA website, but it's something we'll need to continue to monitor. So I'd like to put out an open invitation to the audience as well. If anyone has any major concerns in relation to the use of technology and ethical implications, please just send them in, and we will then look to see if there's anything we can do. And we will also consider whether the revisions to the Code of Ethics that take effect from 1 January 25 actually cover the situation that you have. But it is something we're going to have to continue to monitor, just given the pace of technological development.
Thanks, James. I lost a little sound through that, and I wasn't sure if it was myself or your end, but I think we got the gist of it. I see from some of the comments, some people are having some problems completing the poll. We'll see if we can fix that technically. We do have someone on line who can hopefully fix that. If not, we might have to work out another way to try to get any feedbacks, but bear with us on that one. I had one follow-up just from my own personal perspective, just as you're going through there, James. You talked a little bit about requirement and training and development for a professional accountant to stay up to speed on training from a technological perspective. Do you have any suggestions for what we should be doing, or someone like myself should be doing, to make sure I'm conversant with all these latest technologies?
We'll be launching an AI hub on the ICAS website in the next couple of weeks, Bill, and that will contain links to various training courses that people can undertake. Now, a lot of these will be free. They'll be given from websites like Microsoft, etc. And I think that's a good grounding for people to go to just get a basic understanding of what are some of these AI products, how do they work in general, and it will let you understand some of the issues. It's also great if you have access to any of these particular products to just have a go. So if you have access to ChatGPT or Microsoft Copilot, just use these, obviously not putting in any confidential information.
Okay. Good. Thanks, James. I see I do have a couple of questions appearing on the screen. And the first one, you did talk about this during your presentation, but says, given the focus on sustainability reporting and related assurance, are there plans to update the code to specifically deal with such matters? Do you be able to expand on what you'd talked about during your presentation?
Sorry, Bill, I didn't pick that up.
So it's one of the questions was, given the focus on sustainability reporting and related assurance, are there plans to update the code to specifically deal with such matters?
Yeah, I mentioned during my presentation that the International Ethics Standards Board for Accountants is expected to approve its revisions to the ISBA code in December. It will then be a matter for the FRC and ourselves to consider how this will then be dealt with in the UK. So any assurance-related matters will be dealt with by the FRC, I would imagine, and we will take account of the wider changes in terms of sustainability reporting. So the decisions will be made next year as to when we would look to incorporate that within the ICAS Code of Ethics. There is a possibility we could have a new code from 1 January 26, but this is something we will be considering next year. But there are very much plans in place to have content in the ISBA code and then subsequently in the ICAS code, and I'm sure the FRC will be doing likewise with their FRC ethical standard to cover both sustainability reporting and sustainability assurance.
So we just need to watch this space. The Code of Ethics continues to develop as new challenges come along all the time. Just one practical question to pick up, James. Just if someone has an ethical dilemma, can they contact the Institute and how to try to seek some support about that?
They certainly can contact us here, Bill, and they can phone the helpline on 0131 347 0271. We also have an ethics buddy system, and there's details available of that scheme on the ICAS website. And those who find themselves in a really, really difficult position, of course, come to ICAS first, but we do provide a service via Protect, the whistleblowing charity, if members ever need to access that. Again, there are details on the ICAS website, but please just contact either myself or the number I've just given you, because that can really be useful for members who find themselves in a really, really challenging position. So we do offer various areas for people to seek advice in relation to any ethical matters which they may have. And if a matter relates to an ethics-related audit matter, then if they could just send those queries in via the technical query portal we have on the ICAS website, because those queries are dealt with separately, those dealing with independence issues. Thanks, Bill.
Thanks, James. And just while I've got you, I was going to go to Jim, but I've got one more question. I think it's more for yourself. It's about the new AI hub that you've just mentioned. Will the announcement of it coming live be notified to members by email in due course?
It will be notified via the CA Weekly. Once it's live, we will use the weekly magazine, weekly magazine that effectively we send out electronically to all members. It goes on a Tuesday, and that will highlight once this is up and running. And we will be looking to add to this. So again, I'm putting a plea out there. If anyone has things that they think should be added onto that, please just let us know, because this is something that will evolve. We will need to build it up, and we'll very much need the input from members. If there are any members out there with expertise in AI, please feel free to contact me. I'm sure we can put your services to good use somewhere within the Institute as we really look to move forward in this area, which is having a major impact in our profession.
Right. And so I've got another question. They're coming in thick and fast for you, James. So one more question, and I will go to Jim. It says, great presentation. Thanks for this. Are there any materials to help us in industry? And I think sometimes members in industry find this more challenging than members working in profession. You're surrounded by more accountants to be able to run queries past. But to help us in industry to raise the profile of ethics within our teams, are there any examples of how an ethical culture has been adopted? And I don't know, that might come back to some of the organisations that Jim highlighted, but are there any sort of good reference points that you recommend members went to, James, to have a look?
We generally just refer to the Power of One publications, Bill, which we will be updating. We use that very much as the exemplar, and this is what you're trying to achieve. But I'm certainly happy to have private conversations with any individuals who are looking for more information in this. So any members who are currently on this webinar, I am happy to have discussions in relation to such matters, especially if you are finding problems within your organisation, or you're looking just to get a better feel for how some of these things should be taken forward.
Okay, good. I've one interesting question come in, but I'm going to go to Jim on that. But if we've got time, I'll come back to that one that's just come in. But Jim, I was just wondering, how do the ICAS survey results compare with any other professional bodies? Do you have any information about that?
The ICAS results are very consistent with other organisations and institutions that I've found. So therefore, ICAS is really in a common position where the majority of people are relatively confident in being able to deal with ethical issues, but a minority are not. And we see that with the same with their satisfaction with the outcome where they've raised it. The majority are satisfied that their organisation has dealt with it appropriately, but there is consistently in many organisations a minority who are dissatisfied with this, and that reflects a common view that I found across many sectors.
Okay, thanks, Jim. And I'm just wondering, this might be partly for you or maybe James, but as a result of some of the findings that you've come up with, is ICAS taking any specific actions following the survey?
That's definitely one for
James.
One
for me, I think, Jim.
Yeah, James, yeah.
Yeah, this is something we are giving consideration to at this moment, Bill. So we're preparing a plan as to, what has been identified here and what is there that we could do to further promote, in terms of ethical leadership, and are there any tools, anything else which we can add to, we already have considerable tools out there on our website, and I've mentioned the power of one. We also have papers there on the right, the good and the virtuous. We had additional guidance on conflicts of interest, and there's more we can add, but we're certainly looking at the results of the survey and seeing how best we can take forward to make sure that we provide the best assistance to members in relation to ethical dilemmas.
Okay, good. Thanks, James. And the question just for myself, for Jim, I'm just wondering, in terms of all of the analysis and stats in there, did you have any breakdown by type of organisation, or is your sample not quite big enough for that? Because I'm just wondering if we're seeing different trends from people working in industry or working in large firms, small firms, etc., to try and identify where ICAS could actually be targeting any support that was needed.
Yeah, we provide a really comprehensive breakdown of various segments, not only those that work in practice versus those that don't, but also age and length of membership, gender, and location in terms of whether they were in East, West, North Scotland, whether they're in England, whether they're elsewhere. So all that breakdown is available to the ICAS Insight team, and they have the duty to particularly pinpoint if there's any specific areas that they wish to address in terms of future communication. And I think, as been mentioned a couple of times, the Power of One is a tremendous initiative that's had a long life, but it's still not universally understood and recognised, and therefore that is a challenge for ICAS to continue to push that across all of the various different segments and sectors amongst the membership.
Good. Thanks, Jim. And I'm going to make this the last question before we wrap up, but it's for James. And it's a good question. Do we anticipate incorporating some sort of test of positive ethical stance in the recruitment of ICAS trainees? And I'm almost tempted to add in, how do we ensure members remain having an appropriate positive ethical stance? And that might be down to CPD, but I'm just wondering if you have any comments on that, James.
There's nothing specifically planned at the moment, but it's a very good question, a very good point, and I think it's something that may well come as we move forward. And I know more and more organisations use psychometric tests of one type of another, and so I think, in the future, with the way technology is going in AI, I think something may well be developed in that space that might assist in that process. I wouldn't rely on it at the moment, but just given the speed of change and so forth, I think it's a very good question, very good point. And it really comes back to one of the points I always make here within ICAS, which is if you get the right people in to begin with, it makes the job easier as you go on. So if we can then make sure we're getting the right people into the profession in the first place, it might help mitigate risk at a later stage. So one to watch, I would say, Bill.
Okay, good. Thank you, James. We're almost out of time. I did say we'd finish by 12, and I think we're just about on track like that. So I'd just like to express my thanks once again to James and Jim for their excellent and engaging presentations. Please also remember that you can stay up to date with everything that you want to know in terms of technical information and guidance at ICAS.com, and there's a link on the slide there for you to look at. There's also some exciting ICAS events coming up. And looking ahead, we've got the tax update, I guess, following Rachel Reeves' budget. So engaging, there's actually 2 updates, part 1 and part 2, on 21 and 26 November. And then on 19 and 20 November, we've got CA Summit 2024. So lots of interesting information. You can sign up for those at icas.com/events. So it only just leaves me to thank Jim and James once again for their presentations, and of course to thank you, the audience, for sticking with us, and hopefully you found it engaging. We'll try and sort out whatever problems you have with the poll, so you can give us any feedback, because feedback is really helpful to work out how we can try to improve these sort of webcasts going forward. But thank you once again, and until next time, goodbye.